All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to our panel today. I'm so pleased to see all of you here today. My name is Linda Sanchez Hall, and I will be your host, your MC for today. On behalf of Outreach Aid to the Americas, the Cuban Research Institute, and Florida International University in Washington, D.C., it's my pleasure to welcome you all this morning. And as I mentioned, we are here for our panel, Faith Under Fire, Policy Recommendations for Advancing Religious Freedom in Cuba and Nicaragua. We are honored to have with us today Dr. Teo Babun, here in the front, our President and CEO of Outreach Aid to the Americas, OAA, as well as Mr. Carlos Becerra, Senior Associate Vice President of Federal Relations at FIU in Washington, D.C. Thank you both for being part of our discussion today. As well, we'd also like to give a warm and very cordial acknowledgement to Sebastián Arcos, who is not here with us today, but he is joining us virtually, the interim director of the Cuban Research Institute. As well as I mentioned, a very warm welcome on this slightly cold day, a little colder for me from Miami, but very warm welcome for all of you who are here. As you may have seen, for our in-person guests, we have some café and a little pastelitos and empanadas, so feel free to enjoy that in the back of the room. But we are so glad to have you all part of this discussion today. As you can see, we have our FIUs, I should say, very dynamic interactive wall, so we'll be using this today. Let's go ahead and get started. Just a few logistics for the event. We are live streaming, so again, thank you for all our virtual participants who are joining us today. We would just like to ask for those that are in person to please silence your cell phones, just to be cordial to our panelists, who we will introduce shortly, as well as if any need for the restroom, you will just exit the glass doors that are on the side there, make a left, past the elevators, and you're there. For our online participants, you can use the YouTube chat function to share any comments, questions, as well as for those that are in person, we will have a session for Q&As at the end of the presentation. So make sure to note them or write them down, and we'll be sure to answer them as we conclude the presentations today. Also, we will be sharing a recording of today's session. So for those that are online and joining us, you will have access to it, as well as those that are in person. We are very happy to be able to share that with you as well. Okay, now as we get started, we're going to welcome Mr. Carlos Becerra to give some opening remarks for today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to have you all here and those that are tuned in. We're looking forward to today's conversation. Obviously, FIU is and our Cuban Research Institute. Hello, Sebastian. We missed you here. We are quite eager about today's discussion because it definitely squarely falls in an area of concentration for the university in expertise, considering our strength in Latin American and Caribbean issues, human rights, justice reform, a lot of work that we have also collaborated, just like OAA with the State Department and USAID over the years on. But welcome to Miami's embassy in the nation's capital. And this is also an issue that's important to Miami. Obviously, as we all know, and all of us listening, no city, I'd say, would understand more the plight of human rights and religious freedom issues that all throughout the region, but in particular these two countries today. So, and I also want to salute Teo, a good friend of FIU, and is always thinking of great ideas and great ways to collaborate, and we look forward to doing a lot more with him over the years. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, Carlos, for those kind words. And now we're going to transition over to a bit more of the context of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to have and ask Mr. Babun to please join us so he can enlighten us and kind of set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. So, Teo.
Thank you, Linda, and and thank you, Carlos, for those kind words. And good morning to all of you. It's an honor to be here to thank our partners at FIU, at the Cuban Research Institute, the Latin American Caribbean Center, and each of you for standing together today. This gathering is not academic, even though we're meeting at a university center. It is a moral response to a human crisis across Cuba and Nicaragua. Men and women of faith are facing persecution simply for living what they believe. Pastors have been imprisoned, exiled, stripped of their nationality, and harassed. Churches are being silenced because they speak truth to power. What they are witnessing is a deliberate effort to erase the last independent voices in our societies. But faith cannot be imprisoned. In every small congregation that still gathers, in every prayer whispered behind closed doors, there is hope. And that hope is stronger than fear. As you see often through the sacrifices of so many in the two countries that we're talking about, as well as many others. But these brave leaders and believers remind us that the fight for religious freedom is not about politics. It's about human dignity. It's about the right of every person to worship, speak, and serve freely. That's why today we call on each other, on academia, on civil society, on the faith community, on the diaspora, to stand together. Let's inform, amplify, and mobilize. Use your voices, your platforms, and your influence to shine a light on what's happening. We had a similar symposium conference in Miami on the same subject only a few weeks ago, and it was overwhelming. Over 300 people participated, and the advocacy was tremendous. The word got out, and many said, let's go to Washington and do the same thing over there. And so we're here because silence helps the oppressor, but solidarity empowers the oppressed. And together we can help ensure that freedom of faith and the courage that comes with it will once again flourish in Cuba and Nicaragua and across the Americas. And as you have been reading lately, we're very close. And so to the panelists, break a leg. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Theo, for those words and for really just bringing us back to the focus of what we're talking about today. As you will see, now before I introduce our first panelist, one of the goals, as Theo's mentioned, outside of just advocating and opening the space for this topic, which is so important, is to share concrete policy recommendations as well to advance religious freedom in Cuba and Nicaragua, and to find practical steps as well for the action that can be taken by civil society, policymakers, international partners, and people like us as well. So let's begin with our first presentation. So our first panelist is Teresa Flores, Director of the Observatory of Religious Freedom in Latin America, also known as OLIDE. Teresa Flores is a Peruvian lawyer and director of the Observatory, OLIDE. She holds a diploma in religious studies from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile and is a member of the Latin American Consortium of Religious Freedom. She has extensive experience in research and the study of religious freedom in the region, as it has delivered lectures on hostilities against the right to religious freedom in various academic and political forums. She has also published many works on this topic as well. It's my pleasure to introduce Teresa Flores.
So, good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, the FYU, the Cuban Research Institute, and Outreach Aid to the Americas, and also all the people involved in organizing this critical discussion. Today, I will focus, let me change. Great. So I will focus on one dimension, how legal instruments in Cuba and Nicaragua have become mechanisms of religious repression, giving a legal appearance to the control exercised over faith communities. In this context, the law no longer restrains those in power, but gives their actions an appearance of legitimacy. While repression has become less visible than in previous years, it is now far more sophisticated, embedded in administrative procedures, criminal codes, and bureaucratic rules that turns rights into conditional privileges. Before going further, I think it is important to clarify that when we refer to a constitution in Cuba or Nicaragua, we are not talking about a constitution system like in the US or any other Western society. In these countries, the constitution expresses political loyalty rather than protecting individual rights, a key distinction to understand how repression can be fully legal under domestic law, yet illegitimate internationally. Let me start with the case of Cuba. In Cuba, the law does not simply regulate religious activity. It transforms constitutional language into mechanisms of ideological control. The 2019 Constitution formally guarantees freedom of religion, but only in accordance with the socialist order. That single clause turned a right into a discretionary privilege where faith is tolerated only when it aligns with the state's ideology. The 2022 Criminal Code deepens this subordination and criminalizes the abuse of religious freedom, a term so broad it can encompass sermons, prayer gatherings, or humanitarian projects that questions official policy. Other provisions against propaganda against the constitutional order or dissemination of false news are frequently used to prosecute pastors and lay leaders who share independent message online or in their communities. Control extends also to the digital spheres. Decrees Law 370 and 35 regulates internet use, banning content that subverts the constitutional order or affects moral and cultural values. This framework has produced tangible consequences. Courts have issued exemplary sentences against individuals who criticize the regime on social media, sending a clear message of deterrence to faith leaders and believers alike. In practice, those who post messages for solidarity, justice, or peace face fines, interrogation, or short-term detentions. In the case of Cuba, the main regulation is the 1985 Association Law, which in theory excludes religious associations. However, in practice, the Ministry of Justice acts as the registration authority and subjects them to a similar regimen. This creates a high degree of political discretion, as religious groups are required to provide detailed information on their location, leadership, and sources of funding. And registration ultimately depends on ideological approval, although it almost never is granted. Operating without this authorization constitutes illegal association, which is a criminal offense. The result is a regulatory ecosystem in which religious life depends on state approval. The legal system projects an image of order and respect for rights, but in practice, it enforces ideological conformity and obedience. Since the July 11 protest of 2021, Cuba has experienced an unprecedented tightening of state control over all forms of social expression, including religion. Faith leaders and believers who supported peaceful demonstrations, offered humanitarian assistance, or simply prayed publicly for detainees have faced surveillance, threats, travel bans, and in some cases detention. At the institutional level, the Office of Religious Affairs to the Communist Party, working alongside the Ministry of Justice, acts as the true authority over religious life. It controls registration, building permits, travel authorization for clergy, and even the import of humanitarian aid. No religious activity can occur without its approval. This structure ensures that the state maintains absolute control over the visibility and operation of every faith community, particularly those not aligned with official ideology. Beyond formal regulation, a wide range of coercive tools enforce obedience. Churches are targeted with excessive fines and administrative sanctions that exhaust their capacity to operate. Those who express criticism or call for reconciliation face direct retaliation, including surveillance, interrogation, and restrictions on movement. The government uses the category of regulated persons, or regulados, to prohibit clergy and committed lay Christians from leaving the country or participating in public activities without authorization. Political prisoners include pastors and believers who have expressed dissenting views or participated in peaceful demonstrations. The repression also reaches the private sphere. Parents who transmit values or beliefs contrary to revolutionary principles risk threats to their parental authority. Finally, restrictions on contact with international organizations further isolate faith communities and prevent monitoring, reporting, and denunciation of human rights violations. Through this web of legal and administrative mechanisms, Cuba sustained total control over religious expressions and civic life. Let me now turn on Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, over the past 7 years, the regime has replaced the rule of law with what can only be described as rule by law. Every major aspect of religious life is governed by a legal framework that legitimizes control and criminalizes autonomy. In the administrative sphere, the law on non-profit organizations and so-called foreign agents have replaced churches and charities under the direct supervision of the Ministry of the Interior. They must report every donation, every activity and leadership change, or risk immediate cancellation of their legal status. In the criminal sphere, the Defense of Sovereignty and Cybercrimes law classify critical voices, including clergy, as potential traitors or spreaders of false information. These provisions turn pastoral work, public prayer, or online sermons into acts of political defiance. In the civil sphere, reforms to nationality and migration law allows authorities to strip citizenship, confiscate property, and expel or deny re-entry to those who dissent. Together, these administrative, criminal, and civil provisions forms a cohesive system of legalized persecution. Every closure, confiscation, or exile can be justified through a clause, an article, or a decree. The regime no longer needs overt violence. It is rooted in legality itself. Nicaragua's laws have transformed compliance into submission and citizenship into a revocable privilege, all under the appearance of constitutional order. The result is a climate of legalized fear, where repression no longer requires open violence and faith-based expression is permitted only when it is harmless. Among others, these laws achieve the same outcomes. Churches are forced into silence or underground operation. Humanitarian and educational initiatives are shut down. Clergy are criminalized, exiled, or stripped of nationality. Religious expression becomes a matter of national security and not a human right. In conclusion, across Cuba and Nicaragua, repression no longer relies on force. It has been absorbed into the legal system. Persecution is now systematic, selective, and permanent, grounded in laws and administrative procedures that make silence appear as stability. Faith leaders may no longer face mass imprisonments or exile. yet surveillance, selective enforcement, and threats of deregistration remain fully operational. In this context, sustained attention and protection of documentation are essential to preserve historical truth, hold perpetrators accountable, and amplify the voices of victims. This reality underscores the urgent need for continued vigilance and concrete action. In this context, we propose the following recommendations to safeguard religious freedom. Number one, the first step is to adopt a legal non-recognition policy. This will mean that the United States formally declined to recognize Nicaraguan administrative acts that dissolve or confiscate faith-based organizations. Such measure will help undermine the regime's claim of legal legitimacy and protect the international standing of those affected communities. In simple terms, it will send a clear message that legality does not equal legitimacy when laws are used to dismantle religious and civic life. Number two, another important step will be to create a humanitarian parole track for exiled clergy and religious workers. Many of them have been stripped of their citizenship and forced into exile as a result of regime policies. By coordinating relevant U.S. agencies to provide expedited entry or temporary humanitarian protection, the United States could respond to this form of engineered displacement and help preserve the moral and spiritual leadership that these figures provide in exile. Number three, the United States has already sanctioned several judges, prosecutors, and senior officials involved in applying repressive laws. The next phase should be to extend accountability upstream to those who design, advise on, or publicly justify the legal framework that sustains persecution. This includes legislative committee members, government legal advisors, and policy drafters. By targeting the architects of repression, not only its executors, the U.S. will move from reactive punishment towards preventive deterrence, making clear that writing and defending abusive law also carries consequences. Number four, it is also critical to strengthen digital security and evidence protection for faith-based actors. Existing programs could be expanded to provide encrypted communication tools, secure data repositories, and specialized training for religious organizations. This will reduce their vulnerability to prosecution under cybercrime laws and ensure that documentation of right violations remains safe and verifiable. Number five, the U.S. government should make a long-term commitment to sustain attention aimed at what we call silent repression. Even as overt incidents decline, structural restrictions such as deregistration, censorship, and exile continue to erode fundamental freedoms. Maintaining regular reporting and cross-agency monitoring will prevent normalization of this disease stability and keep decision makers alert to how repression evolves behind legal and bureaucratic fronts. It is vital to keep talking about these issues, not to normalize what is happening and not to forget those affected. What we do, what you do matters, not only because promoting the right of religious freedom is essential, but because these rights belong to people, and it is them that we must protect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa, for that very poignant presentation and for those poignant policy recommendations. It's very insightful, and it's important to highlight as well how the law and policy are being used to not protect the citizens of these countries, but to restrict their faith. Now we move back to Nicaragua, where the government's systematic targeting of churches and religious leaders has deeply affected communities of faith. Our next presentation explores how patterns of repression have unfolded and what can be done to confront them. Our second presentation will be given by our panelist, Salvador Marenco, from Colectivo de Derechos, Nicaragua, Nunca Más. Salvador holds a law degree from the Central American University, currently confiscated by the Nicaraguan regime, and specializes in constitutional law and constitutional procedural law. He also holds a master's in public law from the Ibero-American University of Puebla, Mexico. He is a founding and current member of the Coordinating Council of the Colectivo de Derechos Humanos, Nicaragua Nunca Más, as an organization created in exile after the closure of the Nicaraguan Center of Human Rights, known in Spanish as CENIT. From this position, he has led documentation, international litigations, and defense efforts for victims and political and religious persecution. Salvador, the floor is yours.
Good morning. I want to thank the people who is today joining us in person and virtually. Special thanks to Outreach Aid to the Americas, OAA, and FIU for granting us the space to speak about a right that sustains nearly 7 million Nicaraguans, religious freedom. I represent the Colectivo de Derechos Humanos, Nicaragua Nunca Más, an organization comprised of human rights defenders in exile, as well the persecution that entailed for those of us who were part of CENIT. From our organization, we have been working on documenting serious human rights violations and crimes against humanity, committed to build historical memory and international advocacy, documenting more than 1,400 cases to date. Our work and experience have allowed us to identify the main violation of one of the rights violated in Nicaragua, namely the freedom of religion and conscience, attacking almost 90% of the Christian or believing population in the country, and against our identity, culture, and traditions, attempting to replace the right of freedom, the freedom of religion, with a cult of personality centered on the dictators Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. Allow me to take back to the April 2018. The streets of Nicaragua filled with young people, students, retirees, and families demanding respect for their most basic rights, which unleashed the implementation of the de facto police state and the state of emergency that has allowed crimes against humanity, such as extrajudicial execution, arbitrary detention, torture, including rape, and sexual violence, enforced disappearances, deportation or forced transfer, and persecution for the political and religious reasons, to be committed with impunity for more than 7 years. When the state violence began to intensify, the churches opened their doors, the temples became refuges for the wounded, makeshift hospital, places where hope was not allowed to die. Priests, nuns, and pastors extended their hands to protect life. That act, born of the humanitarian and spiritual conviction to act against oppression and persecution, became an unforgivable offense for the regime of Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo, who publicly declared on July 19, 2018, "I thought they were my friend, but they were cop plotters." Since then, faith ceases to be seen as a spiritual space and became to be considered a political threat, placing faith under fire. El Colectivo de Derechos Humanos Nicaragua Nunca Más has documented to date at least 269 people who have reported to this colectivo some form of violation of human rights, a principled religion, which has allowed us to identify an evolution in the repression of this right. This colectivo has managed to identify at least 4 stages of escalating repression against religious freedom. The first from April 2018 to March 2019, characterized by the beginning of hostilities through stigmatization campaigns, attacks, and destruction of temples, such as the Divine Mercy Church, attacked with weapons of war by paramilitary agents in July 2018, killing 2 young people and wounded dozens of protesters who were taking refuge there. Among them, Gerald Vasquez Lopez, who we represent in a petition before the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights. In addition, multiple death threats and physical assaults were recorded during this stage. The second stage began in April 2019 with the exile of the third priest, Bishop Baez, and ended in January 2022. During this stage, the first closure of religion organization were recorded, as well as the size of temple during commemorative activities for people killed in the protest, as well as the desecration of graves of moderate protest and terrorism against religious symbols, such as the bomb threw on July 31st, 2020 at the image of the blood of Christ in the Managua Cathedral, which was brought to our national territory in 1638, long before it was an independent country. This state was characterized by a police of spiritual intimidation against the congregations. The third stage began in March 2022 with the Nicaraguan regime break with the Holy See following the expulsion of the Apostolic Nuncio, Valdemar Stanislao. This stage would lay the groundwork for the total eradication of religion freedom, focusing on the elimination of religious leaders. The first arrest of a priest occurred during this stage, that of Father Salvador Garcia in June 2022, which would be followed by dozens of arrests of religious leaders, the closure of religion media outlets and university, and the prohibition to entry into the country for religious personnel or their expulsion. The last stage, which is currently underway, began in February 2023, and this is the one in which the absolute eradication of freedom of religion as a right is being completed and implemented as a weapon of political proselytism and cult of personality for dictators Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo. This stage begins with the banishment and the nationalization of the first religious leaders, the freezing of diocesan accounts, the economic strangulation of the old church, the confiscation of property and assets, the closure of the Moravian Church, the main religion sourced the indigenous people on the Caribbean coast, and the absolute prohibition of any form of public manifestation of faith that is not sponsored by the dictatorship. Culture, moral, and religious eradication has materialized in this stage. Having briefly reviewed each stage, we will now develop deeper into some of the main violations identified, from which have come to the considered crimes against humanity. Among these representative forms, we have found the mass expulsion of leader or religious leader or other nationality, or the forced exile of Nicaraguan religious leader. Since after the exile of Monsignor Baez, more than 261 religious leaders has been expelled from the country and forced to exile. Entire congregation of religious people have been forced to abandon their convents and interrupt their community services. Visas, immigration permits, and residence permits have been revoked with any legal procedure for foreign religious leader. In Nicaragua, a mechanism using in the darkest amount of Latin American history has been reactivated: expulsion to silence. This policy has been accompanied by economic and structural persecution through the complete closure of the civic space for freedom of religions. Between 2018 and October 2025, at least 5,651 nonprofit organizations were shut down, of which at least 1,325 were religious in nature, Catholic and evangelical university, school administered by congregation, biblical training centers, faith-based humanitarian projects, among others, making the second most affected group or sector by this arbitrary closure and confiscations. In all cases, there was confiscating of assets such as temple, rectories, land, bank accounts, libraries, and transportation units. Infrastructure that fed, educated, and healed vulnerable communities was destroyed. Doors that for decades has been the gateway to dignity and hope in the face of social injustices and the impunity of the dictatorship crimes were closed. Furthermore, the regime culture and religious appropriation against millions of Nicaraguans has been radicalized through the absolute prohibition of processions, Station of the Cross, and pilgrimages that are not promoted by the dictatorship. The police appear armed in the church of monitoring liturgical celebrations. Undercover agents record homilies and write down the name of the parishioner who actively participate. People's inner and spiritual freedom is cornered by fear. Faith becomes a monitored act and prayer a risky act. Thousands of religious celebrations has been prohibited in Nicaragua. The elimination of freedom of religions and conscience in Nicaragua has also involved the arbitrary detention and exile of Nicaraguan religious leaders. Since 2010, at least 76 religions figures has been detained, priests, seminaries, and evangelical leaders. Of these, 63 were released only to be exiled to the United States, Guatemala, or Rome. 35 of them were stripped of their nationality through arbitrary sentences, and the other 28 victims are also de facto stateless, of all of them without a country to return. Currently, 7 people remain political prisoners, arbitrarily deprived of their freedom for professing their faith. According to the information from the Legal Defense Unit, the political prisoners are Evelyn Matus, who was in prison for liking a tweet by Bishop Silvio Báez, Carmen Sáenz and Lesbia Gutiérrez, for being collaborators of the Diocese of Matagalpa, Efraín Vilchis and Rudel Palacios, evangelical pastor, who were targeted for preaching in favor of the freedom in Nicaragua and for the release of political prisoners, and Evelyn Guillén and Edgardo Cárcamo, detained by carrying and printing an image of Bishop Rolando Álvarez. Unfortunately, they have been not only detained for exciting their faith with religions. While this event has intensified depending on the stage, there is one fact that has been constant and reflects the dictatorship against religious leaders: the constant hate speech perpetrated by both state agents and regime spokespersons. Bishops, priests, and pastors has been defamed in official media outlets. They are accused of being co-plotters, foreign agents, and enemies of the people. The intention is clear: to dehumanize them to justify the repression. And when those who represent the faith are dehumanized, those who follow them are also stripped of their rights. Each of these figures represents life affected. When a priest is expelled, a community is left without sacraments and spiritual guidance. When a religious school is closed, hundreds of children lose their educational opportunities. When a parish clinic is confiscated, sick people are left without medical care. When the pastor who preaches is intimidated, the comfort of the entire family is silenced. Religious freedom has represented the last remaining civic space for Nicaraguans, even if it can only be exercised within the confines of their homes or in the silence under surveillance out a parish church, where priests are forced to submit their homilies in writing beforehand, and even when approved, they are not allowed to utter a single word outside the script. Religious freedom is the last bastion of hope for the victims the people still working in this religion and resisting for many, many, many reasons. In this regard, as a Nicaraguan colectivo Nicaragua Nunca Más, we continue to demand the immediate cessation of arrest, harassment, and persecution against religious leaders and their congregations, which is only the first step in considering a safe return for those who has been expelled from their homeland. At last, likewise, we ask the victim to continue reporting through the secure mechanism offered by our organization so that together we can expose what is happening daily in Nicaragua. And we ask an international community to support the independent and rigorous documentation work that we carry out, as well as to disseminate our reports on the issue, which constitute a solid and systematic record of these violations. We ask the international community to maintain religious freedom as a central component of bilateral or multilateral dialogue within the diplomatic pressure mechanism they promote, taking into account all the impacts described. Even under the threat of repression, we cannot remain silent because dictatorship feeds on silence. They intend for the truth to disappear along with those who speak. However, in Nicaragua, faith remains standing, although wounded, monitored, and persecuted. It continues hands in hands with the people. Defending religious freedom in Nicaragua is defending the right of the people to believe in a different future. It is defending truth and hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salvador, for that very moving and really powerful presentation. Many times it can be it's one thing to hear and to read about what's happening, but to know the firsthand accounts of what are happening to real people like you and me in these countries is very, for lack of a better word, just very, very touching, honestly. So thank you again, Salvador, for those words and for that presentation. You have shown us, again, how repression in Nicaragua has not only silenced the voices of the faithful in these countries, or in this country, but also strengthened the courage for those to continue to serve and to speak out. So now we will turn our attention back to Cuba, where faith continues to serve both as a refuge and peaceful resistance in the face of a regime that has been affecting the island for more than 6 decades. Our final panelist is Joe Suarez, who will be presenting on we'll be presenting on Cuba, the evangelicals and nonviolent resistance in the 21st century. Joy is a journalist, producer, and writer. He has authored several books and has served as correspondent in Cuba for CBN News. His work has been published in The Hill, Newsweek, Univision, El Espectador, El Español, and Vice. Until his exile in 2022, he worked in narrative journalism and investigative reporting on topics such as blacklists and torture. Recently, in the 42nd Annual Miami Film Festival, premiered the feature film Cuba's Eternal Night, where Joy served as one of the producers. Without further ado, Joy Suarez.
Well, thank you, Linda, for the presentation. Thank you for hosting this event to FIU. And as Linda mentioned, we're going to talk about Cuba evangelicals and nonviolent resistance in the 21st century. I like this theme because it's not only showing the victims, but it's also showing people fighting back, like in a peaceful way, obviously. And we're going to explore some particular cases, some examples in this theme. As you have heard, Cuba is a country that really violates human rights in general, but religious freedom in particular. For instance, Open Doors in 2024 ranked Cuba among the 50 countries where religious freedom is more persecuted. Christians face more persecution. And we can say that Christianity and the socialist ethics are completely antithetical. You have the 10 decalogues, the decalogue of the Communist Party, which is the Communist Manifesto that says you will nationalize, and then you have the 10 Commandments that says you shall not steal. So it's antithetical in the core values of both. And it happens not only in Cuba, it happens also in other countries in Iberoamerica. To defend their ideas, a lot of Christians do it through a peaceful way. And Gene Sharp, the political philosopher, he developed some of these nonviolent methods in his investigations in all over the world. And we're going to explore some practical examples of that in Cuba. You are going to find numbers with every case, and those numbers correspond to the numeration that Gene Sharp gave to every single of those nonviolent methods to put out their ideas. And only these parentheses, between 2018 and 2022, the evangelical movement developed a peak, I would say, in in peaceful action, nonviolent resistance in Cuba in general, and also we're going to see some of these examples here. The first that I want to explore with you is a reconquest of the Baptist temple in Yaguajay. It happened in 2005, and it was through a nonviolent occupation. The pastor, Carlos Sebastián Hernández de Armas, along with a group of local Christians, they peacefully occupied the church for 80 hours until its recovery was completed. What happened with this church in the 80s? A group of pro-regime Christians, they took control of the church, and with the consent of the state, they have this church for this building for decades, and then it happened, this nonviolent occupation, and it was probably the first time that civil society had recovered property through nonviolent means. So this is very inspiring. Also, the political mourning is also another way to express nonviolent resistance, and the largest public vindication of political prisoners in the socialist era in Cuba took place in a church. El Calvario Church is a very beautiful, big church in Havana, and 50 years after the wave of arrest of Western Baptist pastors in Cuba, the leader of the congregation of the denomination, Alberto Y. González, at the annual denominational assembly, he asked the congregation to stand and speak one by one the name of those who, quote, were faithful and suffered. He was talking about political prisoners, and this was in the face of the regime, that the same regime that imprisoned them 50 years ago, and now they are being reivindicated in this political mourning event. Also, prayer and worship. You find in this photo, in one of the lower corners, José Daniel Ferrer. He is a very prominent political activist from Cuba. He's now in exile recently, thank God. And in March 2021, he protagonized a hunger strike in Santiago de Cuba. And you have in the picture several pastors. They basically break through a siege of the police around the house of José Daniel Ferrer in order to get there, pray for him, pray for the people who were there, and show the solidarity in the face of the repression. That was very brave, and there are some pastors that are still in Cuba. Also, we have, during the Constitution in 2019, several expressions of nonviolent resistance, letters of opposition and support, group or mass petitions, banners, posters, and communications display. In some cases, it was moved by the apprehension of the moral from the philosophy of the churches, but also they talk in these documents, in these public displayment, in these public displays They talk about economical freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion, which is for everyone, not only for Christians, it's even for those who doesn't want to believe in anything. So we have here some of these protests. This is not small. I mean, this is before July 2021, where the big protests in Cuba took place, and we have several, well, I don't know, several dozens people in Havana. This is in El Malecón, protesting against some articles of the Cuban Castroist Constitution in 2019. Also, there happened several marches. In this case, was in a municipality in Havana, in Marianao, southern Havana, and they were marching through the streets, and they were also protesting the rewriting of the institutions of marriage and family in the Castroist Constitution 2019. This was so big that even foreign media like The Guardian, they say this is an unprecedented campaign. We haven't seen anything like this. And even Juan Orlando Perez, he's a very well-known Cuban exiled journalist. He lives in London. He said, the evangelical movement has shown a fine capacity for popular mobilization and a formidable discipline of message and action. He says that even Raúl Castro was surprised about that. Also, we have a boycott of government-supported institutions. The regime has the pro-regime Consejo de Iglesias de Cuba, which is an organization that tried to control churches. Several of the big evangelical churches said, we're not going to be part of that. We're going to found our own institution. It's the Alianza de Iglesias Evangélicas de Cuba. And not only founding an organization, but also the refusal to dissolve that organization. Besides the pressure, the big pressure that the political police put over them, that's also constitute an act of nonviolent resistance. Also, we have the withdrawal from social institutions. This Consejo de Iglesias de Cuba, this is the logo of the institutions. Several churches moved away from that parastatal institution because of how the Consejo de Iglesias de Cuba is supporting the government. They don't want to be associated with that. And also through public speeches like sermons, pastors like Carlos Sebastián Hernández de Armas. This is the guy who took who reconquest the temple in Yaguajay, the first example that I mentioned. They have been criticizing the policy of the state regards cultural censorship and restrictions of free thought. Also, the protests, we have protests of support assemblies. In this case, the pastor here, he was summoned by the political police. They were putting pressure over him because of the he violated some COVID-19 restrictions. He said, I want to gather with my people. This is a human right also. We're going to do it, you know, according with the sanitary recommendations, but we want to do it. And the church, part of the church, was out of the police station, saying, this is our pastor, don't touch him, we support him. And also vigils. The vigils has a component that is religious in a sense, but also is political. In these vigils specifically, that according to estimates, gathered 100,000 people were expected to participate in. These vigils were asking for, were praying people were praying the vigils for the economical situation in the island and also for the political situation in the island. And the thing is, in the totalitarian regime, if the economical situation is wrong, it's because of the government. I mean, they had control for everything. So indirectly, they were pointing a finger to the regime. And then something amazing happened. July 11th, this big uprising all over the island. I'm not going to claim that it's because of the evangelical churches, but they took a part in this path to building society conscience to get to this point here. There were big, it was a big uprising all over the island in July 2021. And then after that, you have also very heroic, let's say, also resistance. The total personal non-cooperation is one of them. We have examples. I've heard and I documented examples of young Christian men that were in the mandatory military service that said, I'm not gonna go out to punch, to beat my brothers and sisters that are protesting peacefully because I'm a Christian. And they, the authorities put a lot of pressure over them, but that's really heroic. Also, we have rejection of public support. The regime was trying to do theater in TV after the brutal repression of these peaceful protesters. And they said, we invite all churches, come here and we're gonna transmit these in the TV because we want to dialogue with the civil society. It was just a big theater, and I saw some high level pastors breaking the invitations. It's very brave. It's also a way to resist the regime. Well, I'm gonna go a little bit faster. The symbolic claims is part of the nonviolent resistance. We have also signed public statements, in this case against the penal code of the regime in 2022. Several churches, several pastors, several laymen. Also, we have bicycle rides against the foreign policy of the regime, in this case between the Gaza and Israel war. We have civil disobedience of illegitimate laws, theatrical or musical performances, painting as protests. And I'm gonna stop here because I wanna say that I hope you get the picture that I'm trying to draw for you, that nonviolent resistance is a good tool for civil society in Cuba. And I would recommend to keep training people in these methods, and especially to keep helping people to find a path there through nonviolent methods in order to express what they are feeling and where they are living, especially now that the consequences of communism in Cuba had basically destroyed the basic services in Cuba. You don't have power, you don't have food, you don't have medicine. So that's my recommendation, and I again thank you all for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you again to all of our panelists for your bravery, your courage, and honestly for just bringing us all to date as to what is going on in these countries, in Cuba and Nicaragua. It has been very insightful and very, very moving to hear these accounts and these testimonies from you all. So now I will pass, just one moment. Thank you. Now we will pass to our interactive panel for Q&A, which will be moderated by Joe Suarez. And again, for those of you that are in the room, if you can please raise your hand if you have a question. Joe will moderate this session, and as well as those who are online, we do ask that you write, as you have already, your questions on the chat, and we will go through them now. So again, Joy.
Thank you again, Linda. And yes, we're going to transition to this moment. We're going to share some questions from the audience, the digital audience, and also from the audience here. So you are welcome to raise your hand. Okay, Teo, por favor.
I have a question for Salvador Marrenco of Colectivo. Very well explained how the churches have been closed in Nicaragua, the effective ones, how the Catholic Church have have had so many properties confiscated, how many bishops and pastors and others have been expelled from the country, literally how the faith community have been sent out of the country. So based on that kind of activity by the Nicaraguan government, who's left to fight? Who is doing work on behalf of the freedom of religion? How is the freedom of religion and human rights being advocated for, documented, if all the faith-based people have been out of the country?
Thank you for your question, because it's very important to remark that in Nicaragua has committed 6 crimes against humanity. One of them is persecution by religious reasons. And what does it mean? That the people only is resistant in silence in their homes, in their churches, with constant vigilance of the police, with constant threats by the paramilitarians, is part of the regime in Nicaragua, and only left the advocacy. We are asking to the international community, keep on pushing to restore the religion of freedom in Nicaragua. The group of experts of human rights by Nicaragua, created by the Council of Human Rights in 2022, has documented many cases about human rights violation, but with also it has documented the freedom of religions violations in Nicaragua, because this is the last civic space we have in our country, because all the organization has been closed, all the media outlets has been closed, and the people is with constant repression. In this moment, there are people in prison for practicing the freedom of religions. There are people who were disappearance forced because practicing the freedom of religions. In this moment, the only way is to keep on resisting inside Nicaragua in silence, but also with the exiled people, with the pastors and priests who are in exile, keep on pushing with advocacy, international advocacy, with petitions again, in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, using the special procedures of the United Council of Human Rights, and also keep on denouncing, because we have to denounce what is happening, because what does not denounce is forget in our country.
Thank you for your answer, Salvador. I want to transition a moment to our digital public, and we have a question for you, Teresa. How can citizens monitor and report repression against the right to freedom of religion? Do you have any recommendation, any organizations? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for the question. And this is also an important question given the circumstances. I think it is important to acknowledge that religious freedom violations, at least in the case of Nicaragua, are not as evident maybe as in previous years, in previous months. So I think it is important to be aware of these different kinds of pressure. Religious leaders, churches, members of congregations are being censored, are being pressured, are being surveilled. So it might be a normalization of this kind of conducts, but this does not mean that restrictions on religious freedom have been stopped or have stopped. So I think it is important to be aware of this and to know that even if it is, if there are no more mediatic cases, if you know if your brother or the leader of your church it's suffering some kind of restrictions, some kind of repression, it is important to speak about that. And of course, safety first. If there is some kind of incident that you know, but if you are at risk, be careful. That is the first thing. But if you have or know an organization, a leader where you can, trust, So that is also important. If you don't know anyone, then maybe you can act carefully. At Olire, we have a platform for reporting incidents. We can share the website of the organization, and all information that we gather, of course, is anonymous. We don't share the information of the person that provide us the information. And so I think that is important. Be safe. Look around for a trusted organization or person or leader, and share as much details as you can. If we do not monitor, if we do not share the information, we are, I don't want to say help, because it is not as easy. It is not easy to just speak about these things because you are at risk, but it is important to know what is happening there, so we can, keep gathering and discussing what is happening. If we do not have the information, these advocacy activities that Salvador mentioned, it will be hard to do that for us. So yeah, that will be my comments on that.
And not also discussing, but also governments could put pressure over those regimes that are violating human rights. So that's useful. Statistics is useful too, as you mentioned. Thank you very much for your answer. Is anyone here in the public that has any question? I want to transition to another question for the digital audience. They're asking, how can media outlets help expose and report persecution against religious freedom? If you allow me, I would like to intervene here. I think it's very important, but I think it's more important even to train journalists to understand what's religious freedom, because people think that religious freedom is, I don't know, an extreme case where your church is demolished, is just destroyed, let's say. But also, religious freedom implies, for instance, that you can't teach your children your values, transmit to your children your values, because the state is opposing. That's another element of religious freedom. And people who are not sensible, let's say, to these differences, it could escape from your eyes, even if you see those violations in front of you. And it's just a general comment. I really, I mean, it's sad that big newspapers, I'm thinking in El País, El Mundo, big newspapers in Spanish, they had a correspondent for religious matters. I mean, this guy or this lady were really well trained in these things. They know how to identify. They had this sensibility that's developed. I mean, you don't born with that, but by studying the law, by studying cases. So I would say I would recommend las redacciones, the editorial boards to really put people in place that are trained for that job, to religious correspondent. I don't know how they're going to call it, but definitely to have the media involved in these cases. It allows more people to understand, to know what's happening in this sense, and also to do policy changes, because we know how powerful media is. So thank you for that question from our digital audience.
Yeah. Joey? Can I
Yes.
add just a comment?
Please.
Yes.
Please.
Oh, sorry. I have the mic. I just want to add something to what Joey mentioned, and is please share details, because we know that repression in Nicaragua has shifted. It's not, as I mentioned, overt violence. It's a very low-key pressure. So we need details. It's not the same to say the church has been censored, or the activities in the church have been prohibited. It is different if you say, 20 priests have been pressured in the period of time of 1 week or 1 month, etc. So just not mention general patterns, but be as much specific as you can. That will help to see the real dimension of repression in the country.
Thank you both for making this, but I want to talk more specific with the situation in Nicaragua. Not only the freedom of religion has been banished in Nicaragua, also the freedom of expression. In Nicaragua, there's no any media independence inside the country. 60 media outlets has been closure, but the 40% of that media has been closure were religious media, because the government wants to take off to the people the hope message that helps to resist the human rights violation inside the country. Why the media in Nicaragua is important? Okay, I'm going to talk about the media, the Nicaraguan media in exile, because inside the country, you cannot talk in any way about freedom of religion or any right. Because you can talk to the people with the message of hope that is not control. Because inside the country, hold the homilies, the priest has to say to the police what they are going to talk about. And the police has to authorize the speech of the priest in the homily. So they do not have freedom to say all what they want to say. But with the media in exile, you can keep on sending messages to the people of hope, messages with the, I don't know, freedom of political prisoners, freedom of religion, that the church that has been confiscated has to be the bulb to the people. So the media is very important to keep on pushing and to keep on translating the information to the people who is in silence inside Nicaragua. But also international media is very important in this way. We have to create alliance with Nicaraguan media in exile and international media to spread the message of crimes against humanity by persecution for political and religious reasons inside Nicaragua.
Thank you, Teresa and Salvador. Is there any other question here in the, please?
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm here with Race and Equality. My question is on transnational repression against religious leaders. I know that the Nicaraguan diaspora has seen a couple of cases even in exile. So with religious leaders specifically, have we seen any cases of transnational repression? And what would be your recommendations for these host countries like Costa Rica, Spain, the United States, to make sure that they are protecting these people in exile? Yeah.
That's a great question. Thank you, Anna. I want to mention something, and then I'm going to pass the ball to you. But I'm going to talk about how certain policies in several countries that host exiles are threatening the security of those exiles. For instance, here in the U.S., we have found that there are several people that were repressing religious freedom inside of Cuba, and they are here in the U.S. So this is kind of contradiction. I mean, you're trying to escape, in some of the cases of the victims, they're trying to escape that same, not only the system, but the people who made possible the system, because system is a very abstract idea, but there are people behind those bad actions, and those bad actors are here in the U.S. So that's a first general recommendation. Don't allow people who have background in violating human rights to come to the place where people are seeking refuge. So that's something that we have been seeing, at least in the U.S., probably in Spain, there are replicas, but I don't have names and cases, but here in the U.S., yes. And the independent media, again, the media helping to to expose these. Independent media has been working consistently on exposing who these people are, and with testimonies, with the actions that they committed in Cuba, and probably in Nicaragua we have found similar cases. But yes, please, Salvador.
Thank you. That question I really appreciate because it's very important to explain what is happening today in Nicaragua and outside Nicaragua, because the government since 2022 is holding, with very strange, a transnational political of repression, who is characterized not only by the murder, because they have killed 9 persons or political persecuting persons between Honduras and Costa Rica since 2019 and 2025. That is not only the way of transnational repression. There have been others, like the nationalization people. The priests and religious leaders has been denationalized. Around more than 30 leaders of religions has been denationalized, but also more than 60 has been take off the country. That is one of the expression of that political repression, like, outside the country. But that is not all, because the priests keep on being followed by paramilitarians outside the country. In Costa Rica, we have been received such reports that paramilitarians and agents of the dictatorship keep on vigilant the homilies in Costa Rica that are made by, or that are making by, the Nicaraguan priest that has been obligated to be exiled. So the transnational repression is not only guide to silence the person, is only guide to control the faith, to control any civic space in Nicaragua. The churches and the religion in Nicaragua, is a right, but also has been the last civic space that we have inside and outside Nicaragua. So for that reason, it's so important. So the priests inside are silent inside Nicaragua, but the priests outside Nicaragua are also being persecuting constantly by paramilitarians and also by the agents of the regime, to Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo.
Thank you for the question, and I thank you for your answer also, Salvador. One last question from our audience, our digital audience. Maybe Salvador and Teresa, you can help us with the answer. What strategies of resilience can be adopted by religious leaders and faith communities to confront violations of religious freedom?
Well, I think that is an important question, because we have talked about all the bad things that happen there, but it is equally important to remark the positive things. And the positive things, I think, is that religious communities, members of congregations, and people in general in Nicaragua has shown a lot of resilience. They try their best to keep to hold in there in the first place, to keep their faith alive, to share their faith with those, with their brothers and sisters. And some of them have changed tactics, maybe have found strategies to do this in order to keep safe. And I think that even though many experiences have shown that people who remain faithful in their beliefs, they found a way to resist. They will find a way to share the same beliefs with their community, and this will help them to address and to, how do you say, they will find a way to resist the struggles there in the country.
I am totally agree with what Teresa said, but also I want to add that for the case of Nicaragua, the freedom of religion is not only a right, is what we are part. The freedom of religion is part of the Nicaraguan culture, is part of the Nicaraguan person, of the personality of many of us, such as traditional acts. So any surveillances have to through by resisting, but keep on believing that in Nicaragua the faith is not disappear with the political prisoners, that the faith is not vanished when a priest is expelled of the country, a pastor is expelled to the country, when the pastor and a priest is tortured in the regime cells. The faith has to keep on pushing forward to the people to resist and believing, because they cannot subtract our belief in resistance. They cannot subtract our faith. That is the only hope that that the victims has, because they want justice by the people who has killed by the government. Many hundreds of people has been killed only in the few years ago, and who people is tortured, etc. The faith is in our blood of like a Nicaraguan people. So keep on believing and keep on denouncing, because to denounce and to talk about what is happening is the first step to get a Nicaraguan free.
Well, thank you for your answers. And I think in the Cuban case is also the same. You find that in religious communities, the key element is not the individual, but it's the community. And that makes it somehow special, because even if you are going to exile, you are going to find part of that community. It's a global community. I mean, the church is a global community. And because of that, they have a way to be resilient in a very specific way that maybe other groups don't find. But thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. And please, Linda, we have you here back again.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists again. Thank you to Teresa, Salvador, and Joe. Again, for your responses, for giving us the opportunity to think through these challenges and provide some opportunities to act on behalf of our fellow Cuban and Nicaraguan brothers and sisters. So thank you. Thank you again so much. In closing our program for today, we're going to call back up Dr. Teo Pabun, who's going to deliver a call to action. So thank you, Teo. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Linda, and I'll be very brief. So we conclude the symposium, Faith Under Fire, Policy Recommendations for Advancing Religious Freedom in Cuba and Nicaragua. Just taking a moment here to reflect on the powerful discussions that took place here today. We heard from our esteemed speakers who shed the light on the legal repression and human rights violations that many face in the pursuit of religious freedom. The stories of resilience and nonviolent resistance reminds us that faith can be a powerful catalyst for change, even in the face of adversity. Nicaragua, under Ortega Murillo's government, has become a consolidated authoritarian state where dissent is criminalized, civil society is dismantled, and repression institutionalized. The absence of independent institutions, as Salvador well explained, has now accelerated, and accountability mechanisms underscores the severity of the crisis. And it is clear from the presentations that freedom of religion and belief is not only systematically violated throughout Cuba, but it is weaponized and used as a coercion and punishment tactic. The Cuban authorities are deliberately and systematically failing to uphold the right to practice one's faith, because freedom of religion is a tactical enemy of the communist system that aims to control the masses. So it's a tactical enemy by its nature. So how can we help? Well, certainly we're here in Washington and we want to engage policymakers. Advocating for the implementation of the recommendations that were discussed here today. Teresa listed many of them. We need to urge policymakers to prioritize religious freedom in their foreign policy agenda. And that means we have to put some dollars into the programs that address violation of freedom of religion in not just Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua, but also in Venezuela and in other countries that are facing freedom of religion violations, as many of you know, and raise awareness about the situation in Cuba and Nicaragua. Without question, a powerful step towards creating change. So together, I think we can make a difference. We thank you for your participation here today. Thank you again to FIU, Washington, D.C., such a great friend of OAA and a great partner, and a catalyst for making changes. And like Carlos mentioned earlier, the beacon of Miami and South Florida here in Washington, D.C. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you again, Theo, for those powerful remarks and for reminding us that Faith Under Fire does need champions. We do need people to choose to stand for faith, courage, and for freedom. So again, on behalf of Outreach Aid to the Americas, FIU's Cuban Research Institute, and FIU in Washington, D.C., we thank you for joining us on this discussion on Cuba and Nicaragua, and for joining us also in a little slice of the 305 here in